Good afternoon and welcome to Cybersecurity in Jeopardy. Experts weigh in on the latest cyber attacks. If you've just tuned in, welcome to day 2 of InnovFest 2021. My name is Lyndon Wynn Schindler and I will be the MC for today. I'm the program head of I-71, which stands for Innovation Cybersecurity Ecosystem at Block 71 in Singapore. In 2018, I-71 was founded by NUS Enterprise and Singtel Innovate as the region's first cybersecurity entrepreneur hub, with the aim to bring in cutting-edge innovation in cybersecurity. Since then, I-71's regional knowledge and ecosystem has provided startups with the support and go-to-market access to help them land and scale here. But there's much more to do as the threat landscape becomes increasingly complex, and cyber attacks are making headlines more frequently than ever. In a recent finding, major cyber attacks could cost more than recovering from natural disasters. Today, our expert panel will offer critical insights into recent incidents that have put cybersecurity in jeopardy. So to change things up a bit, we'll be doing the first part in a game show format. So we'll be presenting I-71's first game show, Cybersecurity in Jeopardy. Inspired by the memorable American television game show Jeopardy, our panel of experts will be presented with clues about cyber incidents, and they must correctly identify the corresponding incident. So let's reveal the game board and categories for today.
This is Jeopardy!
Okay, so there's the game board. And looking at the board, each of these columns represents sectors where cyber attacks have inflicted huge damages. And the numbers in each box are what each cyber attack has cost the victims. So the 3 categories we have for today are critical infrastructure, supply chain, and healthcare. So for the first round, I'd like to introduce Abbas Kudrati, Chief Cybersecurity Advisor at Microsoft Asia. Hi, Abbas. How are you doing today?
Hi, Linda. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me here.
Good. Well, here, let's go with the game, shall we? Okay,
That's
looking
great.
at the game board, let's go with critical infrastructure for 5 million.
Yep, it is.
Okay, so it says this cyber attack shut down operations at a major U.S. gas company, which supplies the eastern U.S. with over 3 million barrels each day. Which attack was it, Abbas?
Oh, this is fresh in the memories, not too far ago. This sounds like a colonial pipeline attack.
Okay, let's look to see if you have the correct answer. Is it? Yes, it's the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. So can you share more about this attack and any learnings we have from it?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, if I start talking about the whole ransomware attack, I'm going to take the whole hour. But not too long ago, it was, I think, the 6th of May, when the attackers have attacked Colonial Pipeline with some malicious actor, and they launched an attack and started stealing the data. They locked the computers and also requested the ransom. But surprisingly, on the next day itself, which is the 7th May, Colonial Pipeline paid the ransom to these malicious adversaries. What surprised me in terms of the way the whole attack was launched, if you look at it, what happened in that case is, initially the attacker did a password spray kind of an attack, or brute force to be more precise, and they got hold of a particular account. And using that account, they phished a particular user by sending a malicious link to them. And in that malicious link, when the user had clicked on the malicious link, it went to the Google Drive and downloaded a zip file which had the payload in that. And they also further exploited the SQL, using a SQL injection technique, their VPN infrastructure, which could be out of the patch or whatever other reason, but they could exploit the SQL injection technique in that and go put their hands on that. So after entering into the environment, they started moving, traversing towards further environment within the network. They started using that payload. They created the command and control center. They installed the team viewer in one of the victim machines so they can start remote monitoring around that. And using that backload, they started doing the keylogger activity and started taking screenshot as well, using the .NET commands and many other things. Finally, they got hold of the data, they exfiltrated the data, and they encrypted the data and lock up their data as well, and asking them for the extension of the money. So this was a very high level timeline on that, in what happened in that case. Of course, as we go, we can discuss in terms of what we learn out of that and what could be done. Let's park that scenarios at a later stage when we discuss it. What could be
All
done
right.
better in that space?
All right. All right. Well, thanks, Oas. Well, we'll come back to you later then during the panel discussion to hear more insights. So thank you. And now we'd like to hear from Magda Shelley, Head of Cyber Advisory at Marsh Asia, to take the next topic. Welcome, Magda.
Hello, Linda. What a pleasure to be
Hello,
here
hello.
today.
Nice to have you here. All right, so if you're ready, let's start the game. Okay, we're looking at the game board there on the bottom of the screen. And let's see, which one will be good? Let's go for supply chain for 11 million then. All right, so this cyber attack forced the world's largest meat supplier to shut down all of its plants. Which
What,
attack was it?
what happens, Linda, if I get it wrong? This
Then they
is
suffer additional damages.
this is for sure the world's largest meat processing company known as GBS.
Is that right? Yes, it is. The JBS Meat Plant ransomware attack. So, can you tell us more about this attack or perhaps attacks like it and what the learnings are from it?
Definitely, Linda. I think the first point about this attack is, of course, to mention the amount of ransom. The company paid an amount equivalent of 11 million in ransom to the cyber criminals. And the ransom amounts are increasing tremendously, reaching even 40, 50 millions. Now, when it comes to this kind of attacks, I think what we have seen in the overall environment is that attacks on operational technologies or plants in general have been increasing, targeting not only traditional information technology but as well operational technology. This is the first point. The second point, I would say, as an example for this attack, it is known that the attack has been performed by a ransomware called Revil, and similar attacks are actually using affiliates or similar cyber criminals. And those affiliates are basically distributing the ransomwares in different means. Phishing is very well known and the most popular. But then the second one might be exposed services like RDP or even other vulnerabilities across the ecosystem or their assets in general. So, one aspect that I would like to add here as well, which I found extremely interesting, is how cyber criminals are trying as well to circumvent being detected by the cybersecurity tools. For example, the phishing or the attachment contained in the emails are not anymore directly containing the malicious software, but they might contain what we call a loader with a link that actually get that file afterwards. So the way of how cyber criminals again are trying to circumvent being detected is getting more and more sophisticated and at the same time really fascinating. So, Linda, GPS halted its operations for all its US plants. And basically, the initial assessment or the press statement by GPS mentioned that it was an organized cybersecurity attack affecting some of the servers supporting its North American and Australian IT systems. But soon after, it was clear that the company was dealing with a ransomware attack that actually was or is reported as initially being Revil. So Revil is actually indeed responsible for the attack, and the group, even though hasn't not written about the attack on the dark web, it's still assumed as such. So according to GBS, they made significant progress to reinstall and stop the attack while it happened. Now, of course, it means that their systems couldn't come back all online at the same time. They needed time to recover the operations, but the recovery time was still very remarkably fast in this particular example. We're talking about a 1 day recovery time. The, the company did pay the ransom, which is what facilitated this recovery time, of course. And In additional, it's basically what we can see that those attacks or this type of attacks are focusing as well on operational technology. And as such, we're talking about plants, about critical infrastructure, essentially in supply chains. And that means that we need to look at the overall attack surface and not only the traditional IT infrastructure, but as well the operational technology.
Okay, well, thanks, Magda, so much. So, I mean, there's lots more to discuss, but we'll come back to you later during the panel discussion. So, thank you. Next, I'd like to bring in Selwyn Scharnhorst, Director of the Ecosystem Development Division at the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, for the next topic. Welcome, Selwyn.
Thank you very much, Linda. Very glad to be here.
All right, we're so happy that you're here with us today. And so we'll cue the game board now and see which one we should pick for you. Okay, let's raise the stakes. Let's go for supply chain for 18 million.
Okay.
Okay, so this cyber attack on a software spread to its clients worldwide, including top private firms and critical government agencies. Which attack was it?
So based on the category and the amount, I'm guessing this is the SolarWinds breach.
Is that correct? Yep, that's correct. Of course, you would know that, right? So can you tell us more, Selwyn, and how a strong ecosystem could have made a difference?
So this was big news in the cybersecurity community, and news broke towards, I think, the end of last year, that there was a significant breach of US-based entities, both from the public sector and the private sector. What they had in common is that they used a piece of software from a company called SolarWinds. And SolarWinds is a Texas company that produces a software that they call Orion. And Orion is used by US government agencies, Fortune 500 companies worldwide, and some other end users from different parts of the world. And they use it to manage their networks. And as you can imagine, managing the networks of a government agency or a Fortune 500 company is not an easy thing. And it's pretty complicated. And this kind of software requires special access, special privileges to be given on the network or on your computer in order to be able to do their work. And this supply chain attack was a fairly sophisticated one, sophisticated in many ways. And I'll explain. So hackers, first of all, had to infiltrate into SolarWinds, the company itself. Then they had to get to the infrastructure that SolarWinds uses to be able to create updates for its software. So, you know, an update may be something along the lines of, if you have a version 1.1 of a piece of software, you need to go to, let's say, version 1.2, or maybe even a version 2, version 3. So they infiltrated into the infrastructure that allows SolarWinds to be able to update software that is used by all the other companies out there. And that's the tricky part. So when the hackers infiltrated into that process, they managed to get their tainted update with their own malware into 18,000 organizations that downloaded this. However, the hackers were, of course, quite far more targeted. The sense is that they were more driven by espionage, geopolitics associated with a particular state. And they were more targeted. They chose which backdoors that this tainted update allowed them access to. They chose which specific organizations that they wanted. And then they subsequently, within those organizations' networks, they did very stealthy activities. They impersonated the company administrators or the organization administrators to escalate the kind of access that they can get within the victim's organization. They get privileged access to data, and they may even take out some of the data, hiding it amidst legitimate traffic. And the reason why we call it a supply chain attack is because, in this case, the hackers intruded into the victim's network by first compromising the victim's trusted supplier. So let's say, for example, in the case of a Fortune 500 company that fell victim to this, the Fortune 500 company deployed Orion software, and they fell victim because Orion was created by SolarWinds, and SolarWinds was the party that was infiltrated. So that's what you call a supply chain attack. Now, I won't go into far more details on this. I think many people have published quite a lot of this. I'll just talk about some of the kind of the impact and maybe touch on a few of the lessons. There are a lot of details given by various places, including CSA's own SingCert had an article online about this in February 2021. So the amount that was on the Jeopardy board was US $18 million. And that's actually the cost just to SolarWinds itself. I believe that was the amount that they estimated it cost them back in April. And the numbers continue to go up, I'm sure. It was estimated even earlier in the year that cyber insurance companies would be paying out several times that amount. And fixing and cleaning up the damage, which could involve replacing networks, replacing components, which if you can't replace them, maybe you can't clean your network of this. Replacing those networks, fixing them on the victim's part could cause even more multiples of that. And so that's the tricky component of it. And that's the deadly part about a supply chain attack. If you target a particularly critical vendor who has a significant market share in a demographic of your interest, you just target one supplier like that, and you get access into a numerous range of companies in your target demographic. So that's tricky. And that's one of the concerns about this kind of attack. It's not an easy attack to protect against. Many of the basic things that we often talk about in cybersecurity apply here. Things like, for example, in the first place, you need to make sure that your own staff within your organization, that they have awareness about cybersecurity. Creating that culture that you need to be a bit careful when you click on things that you're not familiar with. I think that's important. Being prepared to be able to respond to something like this, right? I think that's another key important thing. Often people say it's not an if, but an issue of when, and you don't want to be caught wanting when the when has happened to you. That's the second component. A third component is, as you can imagine, with supply chains attacks, it's good to have a conversation with your suppliers, your vendors, about security. What are they doing about security? Do they take measures to engage with their staff about security, building up their awareness? Do they do testing within their organizations, for example? And last of all, to those people who are in the cybersecurity industry, and of course, I haven't forgotten you, since I work with many members of the cybersecurity industry every day. Part of the tricky part about cybersecurity is there are always sources of friction and difficulties in implementing things across different organizations. And things like this, difficult problems like this, throw up opportunities on how we can innovate better, solve the problems of the end users better, right? It's almost difficult to claim or be able to say that you can solve everyone's problem. But being able to be clear on what demographic you can try and make a difference, you can remove friction, get it done easier, whether it's a better way to get staff more aware about cybersecurity, help organizations better understand their assets or the assets of their suppliers and how they connect up together. I think these things matter. But I'm sure we'll have a very interesting conversation ahead, so I should save something for that conversation later as well. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Owen. Yes, of course. There's so much more to discuss always with these issues, but thanks for providing us a background, and look forward to hearing more from you during the panel discussion. All right, so finally, last but not least, let's hear from Doug Witchey, Assistant Director for Cybercrime Threat Response at Interpol. Hi, Doug.
Hi, Linda. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Okay, are you ready?
I am.
Okay, so let's look at the game board. Okay, so there seems to be some strange boxes going on over there in the last category. So let's try healthcare for $0. But if we have time, maybe you can also share about how cyber attacks could also potentially cost lives, as shown in that last box in under that category. But first, let's go to healthcare for $0. Okay. As COVID-19 was emerging, a national hospital was saved from a potential ransomware disaster due to timely intervention and response. Which attack was it?
Yes, it was, and I'm not going to tell you.
Oh,
Primarily because, look, it involves one of our member states, and we're really not in a position to talk about some of the challenges and issues that various countries around the world may have. But I can share some of the interesting issues around the attack, and unfortunately, it wasn't unique during the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw numerous healthcare attacks, which resulted in the release of a global purple notice, Interpol purple notice, to all countries around that threat. This attack particularly was interesting in that we identified, or the country involved identified, and then reached out to us for support and assistance in relation to the attack. They identified a beacon within their national hospital. As a result of identifying that beacon, we're able to isolate it and analyse it. The real true factor in relation to that was the country involved really didn't have the capabilities to adequately respond to that. We deal with a broad range of countries from first to third world, and what they did need was some expert assistance and support in relation to that threat. Bringing in the services of our private-public partner network here at Interpol, we're able to provide some technical support from one of our key cybersecurity teams and organisations. And over the course of around about 2 months all up, we're able to cleanse the systems and actually prevent obviously any further damage in relation to that case. The hospital system that was attacked in this case was the primary responder to COVID-19 in that country. So obviously ensuring that that type of critical infrastructure is protected and maintained is one of the key, I think, fundamental issues for all of us in the cyber environment, and ensuring people are safe. We have seen attacks on other hospitals, unfortunately, across the Americas and Europe, as well as Asia. We've responded to a range of different attacks over time. We've seen an attack on a hospital in Germany, which resulted in the death of a young lady at that hospital that was obviously being provided critical care, and the ransomware attack debilitated those systems. So they're currently following up that inquiry with potential murder charges against those offenders. And obviously, more recently, the attack against the Irish health system, which the Irish police are actively involved, and we're supporting them in relation to that response and activity. So it's an ongoing issue, an ongoing threat, particularly around critical infrastructure. The other examples provided during this course are obviously key elements. And, we're seeing spikes in ransomware, and it's creating a range of different challenges and threats for all of us collectively. So an attack against one's attack against all. And we will continue to work with our member countries to obviously try to prevent and obviously disrupt the threat actors behind these attacks. So I'll hand back to you, Linda.
Yeah, thanks for sharing as many insights as you can without naming any names. I mean, understand the sensitive nature, so appreciate that. So I'm sure all the panelists have a lot more to share. So let's move on to the panel discussion next and examine the threat landscape in greater detail. So welcome back, everyone, here to the panel. So earlier, you each gave a glimpse into the recent cyber attacks making the headlines. But there's obviously so much more that can be fleshed out and learned from these incidents and others. So let's start by looking at the majority of the attacks mentioned here today, ransomware. So I'll start with the first question for the panel. Okay, so at all these attacks, what did you find the least surprising and what did you find the most surprising?
Okay, I'll go. I'll start and set the scene, and my fellow panelists can join me on. So the least surprising, I would say, is let me go one step back. So the pattern, if you follow the 3 examples or 4 examples, what we saw is we call it a human-operated ransomware kind of a pattern. So traditionally, we see ransomware. One is a commodity-based ransomware, which is targeted towards a mass community, and they are not typically being followed. They just throw something on it. If they get lucky, all good. But in this case, we call this type of attack a human-operated ransomware. That means the adversaries are spending lots of time hands-on keyboard. They work on a target for a number of months. You saw example of SolarWind, you saw example of Colonial Pipeline, we saw the JCB meat company and all. These are targeted toward a specific industry. They do proper study, they They wait for a number of weeks and months, sometimes for 3, 6, 8 months. In case of SolarWinds, you saw how much time they were within the network. So that was a kind of a surprising factor as well. It is not something which they just want to click and forget. And if you look at the way the example which I gave you, Colonial Pipeline, the method is not something new. They are using the same old techniques, phishing, password spray, identifying the weak link, weak passwords from getting the dump from the internet, password dumps and all. Once they get ahead of it, the second technique we saw in Colonial Pipeline example is the SQL injection. Half of the world infrastructure, more than half of the world, I would say, is are because of a misconfiguration or outdated patches on the web applications and infrastructure, which are facing towards the internet. And SQL injection is one of the top most OWASP category in terms of way they are attacked. So common attack, password brute force, SQL injection. So if you fix these two areas, first thing is multi-factor authentication. If the end user have multi-factor authentication for all their identities, starting from their home identities, could be Facebook, LinkedIn, or Gmail account, whatever they're using it, and going back to the company as well, having a second factor authentication would have really helped in terms of blocking those brute force attack. If at all they got one password, second factor would have helped them. Second, continuous monitoring of the missing patches or vulnerabilities or misconfiguration would have helped in blocking that a VPN infrastructure which they were hosting. Could be an older patch or they have not been up to date. Third thing is an active monitoring. If any adversaries within the environment, if they have a good EDR or XDR solution, that could have been picked up, and having a good monitoring system in terms of security operations center or SIM would have identified any kind of behavior going around in the network. So very basic stuff, which is not surprising, but surprising part is why this basic hygiene part was not followed. Over to you guys.
All right, would anyone else like to chime in on this?
Yeah, Linda, I would like to add that definitely while we have seen and we are continuously seeing very sophisticated attacks, we see as well attacks that are using, like we just heard from Abbas, really traditional and old-fashioned type of vectors. And this actually comes down to the fact that companies are still, while we see on the news every day cyber attacks, they are still missing the point into deploying the fundamental security controls. And if we go into particular industries, and I would like still to mention like shipping or manufacturing, then the level of maturity around the fundamental cybersecurity controls is even lower. So it seems like this is the most surprising for me. It seems like those companies, they still do not see cyber as a threat. They do not see it as a business risk. And all those type of attacks are not, I would say, encouraging enough for them to actually relook at their exposures and address them accordingly. They still consider cyber as a technology problem, as an IT problem, and they don't look at it holistically. So this is the most, surprisingly for me, in terms of maturity around the world. Now, the really good point, I think, and what we see coming to ransomware attacks, and I think those are getting very popular, is that on the other side, because of the number and the increasing interest in those type of attacks, we still see an increase in interest from everyone. Even like Selvan mentioned previously, we're talking about insurance companies. And of course, Marsh as a broking and one of the biggest risk management company is dealing with cyber insurance. We see a lot of interest from companies to understand how to address this particular threat of ransomware. So the one really, again, disappointing fact that companies are still missing the fundamentals. They still consider that they are not a target, that they don't need certain security controls, that's not a business risk. On the other side, we still have this positive approach of increasing maturity and interest in especially some industries more than others, and an interest to really get up to speed with the right security measures. So I would say we have a long journey still to go, but there is a lot of positive outcomes and definitely the right direction going on, no matter of country, region, or industry.
Yes, no, definitely. I keep on hearing over and over again, it's a basic fundamental security, right? We're not even looking at like the super complex
I
attack
think
methods.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that just blocking ransomware is probably a false focus, because ransomware is generally a deployment after a penetration of some description, as Abbas as detailed, and generally you get a double ransomware activity through these scenarios where data has been stolen from these organisations, and there's a ransom demand made for the release of that data onto the open net or the dark web, whichever it might be. So, really, ransomware is just a component of a broader issue around a cyber attack and a cyber threat. And I think, from our perspective, we need to also look at, obviously the hygiene issues around social engineering and making sure staff are trained and those types of things, the issues around legacy systems and making sure they're patched and maintained and supported. The threat environment's changed significantly for cybersecurity, particularly organisations. COVID-19 has moved the workspace away from primarily the footprint of an organisation to a remote workforce. Therefore, you've got risks and issues associated with the home environment, their wireless routers, the family members inside the household that presents added risk. So, for cybersecurity, it's really quite challenging from that. And then selling those risks to a company board to actually get them to invest in some stuff, because generally IT is an underinvestment, across the board. And cybersecurity is a nice to have, but not really a must to have. I think, the issues of ransomware at the moment are really highlighting these risks and threats, and we really collectively need to do something about that.
Yeah, so Selwyn, I mean, you're part of the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore. How can we work together and make industry understand the importance of this?
Thanks. So I think the key thing is really starting with the fundamentals, cyber hygiene. Oftentimes it's easy to call it hygiene, but it's actually not that easy to execute. It actually takes leadership, it actually takes commitment, and it also requires, of course, some budget. But it's that budget you have to decide. Are you going to pay that budget in terms of investing in your company culture, in protecting your company, in educating your workforce, right? Or are you going to pay that budget in terms of ransom to someone else? And after you pay that ransom, what you'll find is that as a very high percentage, that same person who knocked on your door rather impolitely to collect that ransom will be around again. Right. So I think it's easier to invest in people rather than to pay a heinous tax, and that's my own sense. And I think so. Start first with cyber hygiene. I think what we see often in cybersecurity is that history doesn't exactly repeat itself, but it rhymes a lot. And if you can take hygiene, if you settle a lot of your hygiene issues, you settle quite a lot of not only the repetition but the rhyme, right? So I think that's a key component of it. But I think the key thing, first of all, is people need to be able to have the leadership to be able to step up and have that conversation. So the great thing is that actually we see it becoming a topic more and more at conversations at the board about board risk and all. But I think that they need to be able to ensure that you don't just have the conversations at the board level, but you actually empower someone to be able to look into it, to get that stuff done on the ground. And I think that's where it happens. And we recognize not all companies may have the resources to have a cybersecurity team within their organization. Some do, and that's great. Some don't. And so you may need to have these conversations with, for example, your IT vendor, right? Who may help you out. Oftentimes for smaller companies, an IT vendor is the person that you go to when you want to talk about cybersecurity, right? And now in Singapore, there are subsidized solutions for cybersecurity as well. We're very glad that now that has taken place. So you can get subsidized solutions, cybersecurity solutions there. In Singapore, we have recently, or last year, we've launched a Safer Cyberspace Master Plan, outlining a couple of things that we're going to be doing going forward in terms of things to be able to help people level up their cyber hygiene. One of the things that we're looking at, for example, is a trust mark concept, because we think that if you can incentivize people to get a trust mark, whether it's for your own organization, or if, let's say, you're an IoT company, for example, and you're producing a particular device or a router, if you have a mark that actually indicates that you've actually invested into trying to be more cyber secure, then actually that may tip the scales in terms of the cost benefit analysis in terms of how organizations think about cybersecurity. Now, it's not a silver bullet, but I think the key thing about cybersecurity and the wicked problem that is that somehow we've got to tackle it at that human level and addressing the human behaviors and the human incentives